The fat electrician. Hit that like button. Most gangster general of World War II, Terry Terrible Allen. You know what I'm saying? Let's see what my boy got to say today, bro. Let's get some education. Let's get it.
Probably the only dude to ever get shot in the face and benefit from it. This guy's probably the only dude to ever get shot in the face and benefit from it.
50 Cent. I'm gonna let y'all rock though. I mean, that's truth be told, that 50 Cent did.
I didn't say nothing.
He did. This guy crawled so 50 Cent could walk or whatever they be saying. Because 50, that's why he blew up.
Today we're talking about the most gangster general of World War II, Terry De La Mesa Allen, aka Terrible Terry. A nickname given to him not by his enemies, but by his fellow high-ranking officers for failing out of West Point, scamming his way through infantry officer school, and being a poor disciplinarian. Terry Allen did not care about the dog and pony show side of the United States military. He didn't care if his men called him general or sir. Most of them just referred to him as Terry. He did not hound his men about uniforms and grooming standards, and he certainly did not think of himself as above his men. He considered himself one of them. He gambled with them, he drank with them, and he fought with them on the front lines.
Fine.
Legendary war correspondent Ermi Pyle describes Terry Allen as one of his favorite people and the true soldier's general. Another war correspondent described him as the greatest leader of men and tactical general in our army, while his contemporaries described him as, and I quote, a soldier of uncertain future in peacetime army, but certainly should be entrusted with a division in a time of war. Terry Allen is a rare case of a high-ranking officer being more concerned about the opinions of the men below him instead of the men above him. And it absolutely infuriated many of his fellow generals. Despite that, he was so overwhelmingly effective on the battlefield that General Patton himself refused to go into battle without him. He was so overwhelmingly popular with the men that served beneath him and war correspondents that he actually ended up on the cover of Time magazine in World War II. Despite that, 99% of you have probably never heard a single thing about him, and today we're gonna fix that right after a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Ridge Wallet. Okay, look, this is like the 10th time.
Sorry, guys. Y'all know how it be.
40% off your entire order, so I'm gonna have a special link down below. You can check it out. Let's get back to the video. All right, our story begins April 1st, 1888. A young Terry De La Mesa Allen is born at Fort Douglas, Utah. Terry Allen was not only born on a military installation, he was basically bred to be in the military. His father was Colonel Samuel Allen, who served 43 years in the Army. And his grandfather on his mother's side was Colonel Carlos Alvarez De La Mesa, who fought in the Civil War at Gettysburg. Terry grew up his entire life on military installations in the West. The first thing this...
No.
I mean, I wouldn't know. I don't know anything about him.
Is he a Confederate or is he?
Or at Gettysburg. Terry grew up his entire life on military installations in the West. The first thing this guy learned how to do after he learned how to walk was to ride a horse, drink, chew tobacco, gamble, and shoot the shit like an enlisted cavalry soldier. By the time he was 10 years old, he was basically in the United States Army because he went to work with his dad and followed him around every single day. So at 19 years old, Terry goes off to West Point. He becomes pretty well known for basically two things. He's phenomenal at riding a horse and doing anything that actually involves like being a soldier out in the field, and he's absolutely horrible at everything else and shows no motivation to improve upon it whatsoever. He racks up more demerits than anybody else in his class at West Point. His uniform's never perfect, his fingernails are always dirty, he's always drinking in class, he's cheating on exams, the exact type of behavior that you would expect from a child that grew up his entire life with enlisted men out in the field. Because of this, he is not very popular with his classmates because, well, it's the 1900s, and at this point in time, the officer class is still very much that same aristocratic class from, you know, the higher society, and Terry Allen isn't taking their dog and pony show very seriously. And on top of that, he also has a very severe stutter when he talks, so everybody kind of like gives him shit and makes fun of him. Because of this, at the age of 21, he ends up getting kicked out of West Point. Not taking no for an answer, he goes and enlists in a Catholic university, graduates at the age of 24, enlists in the Army, and then competes for a slot to be a cavalry officer. And he wins. He ends up getting commissioned about 5 months after his class class at West Point. From here, Terry is pretty much immediately sent to the southern border between the United States and Mexico, where he is tasked with stopping smugglers and gun runners from crossing the border. He gets in frequent skirmishes, and this is his first taste of combat. And when he's not doing that, he has to go and, intermingle with his fellow officer class and their hoity-toity aristocratic society nonsense. And obviously, Terry's still not super popular. He's still rough around the edges. He's still kind of disheveled. He's got dirt under his fingernails. He likes to drink. He likes to cuss. And he's still got that stutter. But Terry does gain some popularity because you know what the hoity-toity officer class likes doing? They like playing polo. And you know what Terry's really good at? Riding a horse, which comes in handy when you're playing polo. Terry ends up becoming one of the best polo players around and ends up being the captain of his team. And they have this game slotted up where he's supposed to go up against this like regional champion team, and they're supposed to absolutely crush Terry's team. But Terry doesn't care what's supposed to happen. Terry wants to win regardless. So he makes his team go out and practice for weeks leading up to this game. And for practice, he has them shooting goals on a target that's only 1 yard wide when the average polo goal is 8 yards wide.
You can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. What?
So Terry essentially overtrains his team, and when that game comes around,
You seen dodgeball?
Yeah.
the regional champion team takes 40 shots at the goal. They only make 7. Terry's team only takes 8 shots at the goal, but they made all 8. And this is the first glimpse we get to see at Terry's leadership and his mentality of how to get shit done. This goes on for a couple of years, and then World War I kicks off, and Terry wants to go off to war. Unfortunately, his current unit is going to stay right where they're at the southern border. So Terry volunteers for overseas duty, so he essentially just gets backfilled into any open slot, which unfortunately happens to be in a supply company. So he's going to go overseas and just carry supplies up to the front line and not actually get to fight on the front lines. But that's not what Terry wants. Terry wants to be on the front lines with the infantry. The problem is he can't really do that because he's not an infantry officer. He's a cavalry officer. So Terry comes up with a plan. He just shows up to an infantry officer graduation ceremony and hops in line, gets to the front of the line, and the commandant looks Terry up and down and is like, I don't recognize you. And Terry looks the dude dead ass in the eye and goes, I'm Alan. Why don't you? And the officer's like kind of taken aback, like, am I the dick here? Do I really not remember this guy that went through my entire course? And he's just like, doesn't know what to do. So he just hands Terry the certificate and sends him on his way. And Terry is now a temporary major and infantry officer. So Terry ships off to World War I in charge of an infantry battalion. Once there, Terry partakes in the St. Mihiel offensive and the Battle of the Meuse-Argonne, literally the biggest battle that America has ever fought in ever. And while he's there, Terry is tearing shit up, okay? He is on the front lines fighting with his men. He ends up getting wounded 4 separate times. The first time it happens, he wakes up in the aid station, looks around like, what the fuck is going on? Sees the medical tag around him with like all of his, vitals and all of his BS and everything that's wrong with him, rips that off and goes back to the front line. Another one of his injuries comes when Terry is shot in the face. Not only does Terry survive and go back into combat, but he actually benefits from getting shot in the face because for some reason, it cures his stutter. And this is really where we start to see the most gangster general start to come into play, right? Like getting wounded on the front line with your men and returning to combat before the—
Man, that's crazy. To get shot and lose your stutter is insane.
No, I'm gonna say
He probably
talks right now.
Probably like scared the stutter out of him or something weird. Get it out.
The doctor says you can. Pretty gangster. Getting shot in the face, surviving, and then returning to combat. Very gangster. But getting shot in the face and having the old adage, what doesn't kill you make you stronger, actually apply, because you not only survive, you not only return to combat, but you show back up and you suddenly speak better, is undeniably the most gangster shit that's ever happened ever. As World War I continues to go on, Terry gets more and more comfortable in combat. This is where he really thrives, and he's starting to get a lot of ideas of his own. And one of the things he comes up with is like, why the fuck are we fighting in the daylight? You know what I mean? Like, let's fight at night where nobody can see shit. It's pure chaos, and Americans thrive in chaos. So one day, Terry gets ordered to take a position, and the estimated casualties of taking this objective are gonna be like 200 to 300 men. So Terry is like, fuck that. You know what we're gonna do? Instead of attacking tomorrow when we're supposed to attack, we're gonna attack tonight when it's dark. You know, at this point, that's not how you conduct warfare, okay? Not a lot of people are launching night attacks in trench warfare, but you know what? Terry just showed back up after getting shot in the face, and now he speaks better. Fucking, I'll follow that guy into any amount of combat anywhere, and that's pretty much how all of his men felt, except for one company commander. This company commander is like, no, we can't do that. We need to follow orders. We need to do exactly what we're told. We can't attack at night. You're gonna get us all killed, yada, yada, yada. Finally, Terry just gets fed up of hearing this dude, pulls out his pistol, and shoots him through the ass cheek. Terry then looks at this company commander.
You think he's Cameron on Paid in Full?
Okay.
Oh, what?
This dude pulls out his pistol and shoots him through the ass cheek. Terry then looks at this company commander and says, and I quote, "There, you're out. You're wounded."
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Company commander goes to the aid station, his XO takes over, they launch this night attack, they take the objective, and they only lose 20 men. So night combat was outrageously effective for Terry and his men, but shortly after that first night combat, the war ends up coming to an end. Terry would later go on to write, and I quote, "I wish the war hadn't stopped when it did. It's a damn shame. I was just beginning to get good ideas about commanding infantry battalions. I wish I could go back to the front and try them out." Regardless, the armistice is signed, World War I is over, Terry ends up staying over in Europe until 1920 as part of the occupation army, and somewhere along the lines he ends up playing polo against the British, and then he ends up being friends with some of the British officers, and he has this one officer that he ends up being pretty good drinking buddies with, and this particular officer's name was Edward VIII, as in like the Prince of Wales and future King Edward VIII, and Terry had no fucking idea until after the fact. So just to recap on Terrible Terry in World War I, literally scams his way into becoming an infantry officer, successfully leads an entire battalion into combat, earns a Silver Star, earns a Purple Heart, gets shot in the face that fixes his stutter, and then becomes drinking buddies with the fucking King of England. Terry's the main character. I don't know what to tell you.
Facts.
So Terry returns to the United States, loses his temporary rank of major, gets busted back down to captain. He didn't do anything wrong. This was just standard practice. He only had the rank of major because it was like a time of war and that's what had to happen. So Terry gets back home, gets settled in, and then in 1922, he gets called into his boss's office, and his boss, this colonel, explains to him that there's this famous rodeo promoter named Tex Austin and the Cattle Association, and they want to put on a competition between an actual cowboy and a cavalryman because there's been this huge rival between the two at who's a better horseman for like 100 years. They want it to be a long distance 300-mile race where each rider is only allowed to use one horse. So Terry asks the colonel who's going to compete for the army, and the colonel says, "You are, and you're gonna win." And he's gonna be competing against his legendary cowboy known as Key Dune. He was a former wagon boss in the Old West. He's just a complete legend, and everybody is expecting whoever the army puts up to get absolutely smoked by this guy. And that's why it's a cattle congress and a rodeo promoter putting the whole thing on. They want to show that cowboys are better than the United States military. Unfortunately, they don't know that the US Army has Terry Allen, and he's the main character. So the media and the newspapers hype this up. The entire world is watching. The very first day, Terry clears over 50 miles and the cowboy barely hits 30. Terry's getting telegrams and updates on the race of where he's at, where the cowboy's at, how many miles are left to go every single night. And Terry is so far ahead the entire time that by the third day, he decides that he has time to stop at a diner and have breakfast. The waiter, striking up casual conversation, asks Terry if he's heard about this crazy race going on between the legendary cowboy Key Dune and some army guy. And he goes like, "I'm sure the army guy is really good, but he doesn't stand a chance against a real cowboy," to which Terry informs him, "Well, first off, my name's Terry Allen, I'm the army guy, and last I checked, I'm pretty far ahead of him." The restaurant ends up paying for Terry's breakfast for him, and then later that day, Terry receives a telegram that Key Dune ran into trouble and he couldn't get feed for his horse one night. Now, on one hand, that's good because Terry's definitely gonna win now because this guy's horse might actually die without getting the proper care it needs, but on the other hand, not exactly how Terry wants to win. So Terry sends a telegram back saying that they need to send an army car with feed and water and everything his horse needs to Key Dune, and that's exactly what they do. They keep Key Dune in the race just so Terry can beat him fair and square. Okay, this is a double win. It's actually genius on Terry's part because on one side, he gets to look like a class act. On the other side, he's preemptively shutting up all the typewriter warriors that are gonna be like, "Buh! He actually only won because that guy couldn't get feed for his horse. It was a fluke. A real cowboy's still better than army cavalry. Buh."
Right.
No, Terry's shutting all that shit out of the gate, and he's gonna beat this guy fair and square. And that's exactly what he does because he ends up beating Key Dune by over 7 hours. For the rest of the interwar years between World War I and World War II, Terry is pretty much just training and really defining the doctrine for what a cavalry soldier is supposed to be doing on the battlefield. You have to realize at this point in time, warfare on horseback is...
Yo, where does the fat electrician live? Because he always has tank tops on. He never...
I mean, he inside his house though too.
I know, but I just thought about that. I was like, I don't think I've ever seen him in a regular t-shirt, but maybe I'm wrong, but... I just noticed his hands were tattered on this video too.
Oh yeah.
Is outdated, but nobody really knows that yet, right? Like, they're gonna get replaced by tanks and trucks, but World War I, tanks were just introduced. They were very simple things. It was just a big metal box with guns on it where you could pretty much just drive straight. They didn't have radios inside of them. They couldn't coordinate attacks. So a lot of people didn't understand the real potential with mechanized warfare. So a lot of people were still under the impression that horse warfare was still gonna be very prevalent in the future. During this time, Terry literally rewrote the cavalry field regulations while he was at Fort Riley. He then went on to write a literal book about it that got published in the 1930s called Reconnaissance by Horse Cavalry Regiments. While all that was going on, he served as the assistant commander in 3 separate divisions where it was said that he, and I quote, succeeded in convincing all of his charges that they were the best outfit in the army. Again, this speaks to Terry's unorthodox but truly exceptionary leadership skills. 1940, Terry is promoted to Brigadier General. 1941 rolls around, the attack on Pearl Harbor, America enters World War II. Terry's getting fitted up for war, and then in 1942, he is promoted to Major General and put in charge of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. So Terry shows up to the first ID, assumes command, and then he meets his second in command, a man that is just like him. He is rough around the edges, he does not care about the dog and pony show that is the United States military at higher ranks, and he also cares much more about the men beneath him than the men above him, and that man's name was Theodore Roosevelt Jr., aka Teddy Roosevelt's son. So Terry and Teddy get to work getting the first ID ready for battle. The first thing they do is flip the entire script on its head. Terry actually becomes friends with all of the men beneath him. They don't even call him General or Sir. They literally just end up calling him Terry. Terry doesn't hound him about having a prim and proper uniform all the time. The only thing Terry hounds him on is that their weapon is absolutely spotless and that they're good at their job. Unlike a lot of other high-ranking officers, Terry doesn't micromanage all of the officers and NCOs beneath him. Terry realizes that he has a very zoomed out bird's eye view of everything that's going on, and the men on the ground that are actually seeing individual problems up close have a much better idea of what's going on and how that problem needs to be solved. Terry focuses on actually picking the right men for the job, telling them what he wants done, and then letting them figure out how to do it. But
they need to do that in the workforce because, boy, they just be...
I don't know.
Like, bruh. Focus, bruh. Do you want the job done right, or do you care about I got Timberlands on at work? Like, what?
So specific.
Because it happened. That's why I quit Verizon. Because they tried to tell me I couldn't wear Timberlands. And I was the #1 sales associate. Look at me. #1 sales associate in the country. In Verizon. #1. They flew me out, bruh. They would pay for all of my stuff. Me. They was bothering me about wearing Timbs to work. Talk about that's not business casual.
Maybe nowadays you can get by with it.
Yeah, because we had actual uniforms. Now they just be wearing sneakers and jeans, which is even more crazy because I quit. AKA they wanted to fire me because of that, and now they wearing Timbs to work. Kind of bullish.
By November of 1942, Terry, Teddy, and the 1st Infantry Division are going to partake in Operation Torch, the Allied invasion in North Africa, particularly Morocco and Algeria, and the 1st Infantry Division is tasked with taking over a major city with an airfield known as Oran. November 8th, 1942 at midnight, the 1st Infantry Division makes its amphibious landing into Algeria, and everything goes absolutely textbook. They see a little bit of resistance, but not much. They overcome it almost immediately. Oran's about 25 miles from the beachhead, and they have to clear all of that distance on foot, rucking and carrying all their gear with them. During that time, they experience very minimal resistance until they come across a town called St. Cloud, where all of the forces had kind of regrouped and fell back to this town in fortified fighting positions and were waiting for the Allied forces to come in and fight them. At this point, Terry's got to consider what he actually wants to do here, because he could send in all of his men, clear out the entire town, kill all the enemies, and probably be considered a war hero for it. But he's going to be putting his men in harm's way, and there's nothing of strategic value inside of St. Cloud. His objective is to take over the city of Oran, and he doesn't need St. Cloud to do it, and he's not going to put his men in harm's way for no reason. The next thing he could do is bombard it with artillery, but there's a bunch of civilians that live in that town too, so that option is also out. So Terry takes one of his battalions, fortifies it, and has them surround the town so the enemy can't get out, and then launch a counterattack later, and continues to move the 1st Infantry Division towards the objective. Okay, this is brilliant. This is literally what the Marines did in the Pacific Theater with the island hopping strategy, except Terry is doing it in North Africa with entire towns. Now remember, this is 25 miles miles they have to walk to Oran, carrying all their shit after landing on a wet beach, probably being soaked, okay? This is gonna be a jaunt and a half. It's gonna be exhausting, and it's gonna take time. The first ID moves all through the night, all through the day of November 9th, and Terry is pushing his men to the point of exhaustion. On the morning of the 10th, Terry is up on the front line with his men after everybody's been walking for a day and a half, and as he's patrolling the front line, seeing how everybody's doing, he comes across this utterly exhausted rifle company that's taking shelter inside of a ditch next to a road because there's some stray artillery fire coming in. So Terry walks through the ditch, gets on the other side, and he's standing, and he can see the city of Oran off in the distance, and he's looking around, he's looking at the faces of his men. He knows they're exhausted. The men are looking back at him like, okay, here it comes. We're about to get our ass chewed because we're taking a break. Fuck. So Terry looks back at the city of Oran, and then he looks back at the men, and he says, and I quote, "There's a lot of good-looking girls in that city ready to welcome the liberating Americans."
I'm so stiff.
Where did that go?
And with that, his men got up, reinvigorated, and continued towards the objective. Again, Terry showing his expert leadership, being able to get the absolute most out of his men when shit sucks. One of the men that served under Terry later described his leadership style as something along the lines of, he always wanted to achieve the objective, not because he was worried that he would get in trouble or get chewed out by Terry, but because he genuinely did not want to let Terry down, because he respected him that much. So they go, they cleared 25 miles, they take over the city of Oran, they achieve the objective, and as a reward, command decides that Terry Allen is supposed to hunker down in the city of Oran and piecemeal out his 1st Infantry Division to support other elements.
But you can't do this to me.
At this point, Terry's pissed. He thinks he has the best infantry division in the army, and he doesn't think that he should be piecemealing out his men.
That guy will never not be the Green Goblin to me.
He thinks he has the best infantry division in the army, and he doesn't think that he should be piecemealing out his men to play support roles for everybody else. He thinks that he should be up on the front lines, charging towards the enemy. And this goes on for months. The entire time, Terry is raising hell with his chain of command, and his chain of command just simply isn't hearing it. And after 3 months go by, Terry's finally had enough. He goes over all of his boss's heads and goes straight into General Eisenhower's office, looks him in the eyes, and says, and I quote, "Is this a private war or can anybody get in?" General Eisenhower, impressed by Terry, issues the command to reassemble the 1st Infantry Division and get them into combat, infuriating all of the officers in between because Terry just went over their head to the big boss. So now Terry's got his entire division back, all of his men are under his command, and what he decides to do is he wants to start getting them trained and ready to go into combat. He gives them extensive night fight training and gets them ready for combat with like the couple of weeks that they have. Early March, Terry gets an order that him and the 1st Infantry Division are supposed to go take over a city in Tunisia known as Gafsa, about 45 miles away from Oran. Terry needs to have the entire division moved into place on March 16th, just north of the city, and then on the morning of March 17th at first light, they are going to attack and take over the entire city. So Terry does just that. They arrive on the 16th, exactly where they're supposed to be, and that night, Terry says, you know what? Fuck it. We're gonna fight at night. Terry essentially defies orders of fighting at first light when the enemy can see and launches a surprise attack that night. The 1st ID takes over the entire city with minimal casualties. The first thing the next morning, Terry's boss, a guy by the name of General Patton, shows up because he wants to see the assault take place. Right as the sun's coming up, General Patton storms into Terry's headquarters asking what the hell's going on, why don't I see any movement, why aren't you attacking? Terry nonchalantly informs General Patton, battle's over, I already have all the objectives.
Let me hear you say it. Let me hear you say, good job.
Stupid.
Good, job.
Well, now Patton's not pissed off that the objective wasn't met. Now he's pissed off that it wasn't met exactly how he wanted it to be met, and he demands an explanation from Terry. At this point, Terry casually asks General Patton, do you know who Knut Rockne is? At which point, Patton responds, yeah, what the hell does a Swedish football player have to do with war? If you don't know, Knut Rockne was the guy that popularized forward passing in American football, so Terry explains to him, the night attack is essentially the forward pass in the infantry. Telling Patton, and I quote, why would I beat my brains out for a yard and a half when I could just pass the ball for 40 yards? At which point General Patton says, again, and I quote, oh, and then he fucking leaves. From here, Terry and the 1st ID are ordered to help the Allied forces take over the next city, El Gater. Again, they launch a surprise attack, taking over all the preliminary objectives, and from here, they experience heavy German resistance, a ton of counterattacks. They're getting strafed by the Luftwaffe, they're getting hit by artillery. It is an absolute shit show. After a couple of days of fighting, Erwin Rommel sends in a bunch of heavy tanks to punch through the American 1st Infantry Division's lines, and they are making a beeline straight towards Terry's headquarters, at which point Terry is is ordered to fall back, to which he responds to his chain of command, "I will like hell fall back and I will shoot the first bastard that does." And the 1st Infantry goes on to repel the attack. That very same day, Allied intelligence cracks the German battle code and they intercept a radio transmission saying that the attack is going to resume at 1600. A little bit later, they intercept another transmission that says the attack has been postponed until 1645. Now, to most people, this just seems like good information to have. Right now, we can, be ready and defend ourselves when this attack comes. But to good old terrible Terry, he sees a unique opportunity to fuck with the enemy, and that's exactly what he's gonna do. So Terry waits until 1615, 15 minutes after the initial attack was supposed to take place, and then he orders his communications unit to send a transmission on the German radio frequency that says, and I quote, "What the hell are you guys waiting for? We've been ready since 4 p.m. Signed, the 1st Infantry Division."
Have a nice day, and thank you.
Shoot.
Okay, I don't think you guys understand how beautiful this really was, okay? It was like an onion of go fuck yourself. There's so many different layers to it. I mean, for one, it's just funny. 2, it demoralizes the enemy because now the enemy knows that we've intercepted their communications, we've broken their battle code, we know they're coming, and we're not scared. And 3, the story of this happening spreads through the front lines like absolute wildfire and increases morale like crazy. I mean, could you imagine being a frontline soldier? You've just fended off the infamous German blitzkrieg by Erwin Rommel, and then your good old buddy, your boss, Terry, essentially pulls his junk out, lays it on the table, and asks Erwin Rommel if he wants seconds because he knows that his boys are gonna fuck him up if he does. You'd be absolutely pumped going into that battle, and that's exactly what happened because they stuffed him in the pocket again. At which point, none other than General Patton comes strutting into Terry's headquarters again with a smile on his face and says, and I quote, "Terry, when are you gonna learn to take this damn war seriously?" The battle continues until April 6th, until they've achieved all of their objectives. After this, the 1st ID is tasked with basically going around Tunisia and cleaning up all the remnants. They're going around following Terry's command. Terry's launching night attack, day attack, night attack, staggering back and forth, keeping the enemy guessing. It's absolute chaos, and the 1st ID just mops the floor with the enemy. The entire time, Terry and Teddy Roosevelt Jr. are on the front lines telling their men, like, okay, once we clean up Tunisia, we're gonna go back to Oran for some R&R. We're gonna have a bunch of fun. We're gonna beat up every MP in town while we do it. Now, while all this is going on, General Terry's starting to get a lot of publicity in Time magazine and the newspapers back home, and Patton is all over PR, right? That dude thrives on PR, and he's starting to kind of like get a little bit jealous that Terry's starting to attract some of the spotlight. Time magazine actually called Terry the best commander of an infantry division in the United States Army, and the next version of Time that comes out, General Patton gives an interview where he describes the combatants of El Guitar, aka the 1st Infantry Division, as a bunch of freshmen. Terry, noticeably fucking furious because he's insulting his precious 1st Infantry Division, calls him out on it. Him and Patton get into a back and forth. Patton calls him tired, and they get in this big pissing match. At one point, Patton actually ends up showing up to Terry's headquarters in person while Terry and the 1st ID are clearing out the rest of Tunisia, and walks in, they're talking, and Terry kind of asks, looking around the HQ, there's, some foxholes dug, and he asks Terry, which one's yours? And Terry points to his foxhole, and Patton walks over and takes a piss in it. At which point, Terry's bodyguards click the safeties off their Tommy guns, and Patton realizes, oh fuck, I might have took this too far. Okay. And Patton quickly scurries out of Terry's HQ and fucks off. So Terry is absolutely not getting along with his contemporaries and the men above him in the chain of command, but at the end of the day, he really doesn't care what the people above him think about him. He wants to get the job done and take care of the men below him, and that's exactly what he's doing. He's not gonna let some big name talk down to his men just so they can get more press. But it's not just Patton. Omar Bradley also does not really like Terry Allen, because Omar Bradley shows up to see how the 1st ID's doing, and what he notices is, unlike all the other infantry divisions that are, eating cold food out of a can, every time he shows up to the 1st ID front lines, their chow halls are full of fresh beef because apparently they fucking found some on the battlefield. And this was apparently a big deal because they were all ordered to not eat the local livestock for fear of getting people sick, but also just fucking cook the meat. People have been doing this for tens of thousands of years. It's worked fine the entire time. General Terry's gonna bend the rules to get his guys some warm food and take care of them because that's just the type of guy he is, but Omar Bradley interprets this as him being a poor disciplinarian and being lax on all the policies, so Omar Bradley doesn't really like him either. Regardless, the 1st ID finishes clearing out the rest of Tunisia, and then they go back to Oran for some much needed R&R. So the first ID shows up in Oran, and this is where shit kind of hits the fan, because the first ID took this place over a couple of months ago, and since then the second wave of American forces has kind of went in, taken it over, and essentially turned it into a major military installation, right? You've got all your administrative people, you've got your supply people, they're all running around in their Class Bs. These guys have never seen combat, they've never seen the front line, and when the first ID shows up, they're informed that combat soldiers are not allowed to go into the bars and officer clubs inside of the cities.
Well, pardon me, young man, excuse the shit out of my
Keegan.
goddamn French.
This, rightfully so, does not sit well with the 1st Infantry Division. Like, motherfucker, I'm the one that took this city over and fought the Germans. You showed up after the fact, and now you're gonna tell me I can't go into the bar? Absolutely not. You can go fuck yourself. So there's a bunch of fights, there's a bunch of partying. On one occasion, General Allen is sitting down at a restaurant having lunch when he sees one of his soldiers with the big red 1 patch on his arm getting into a fist fight with a couple of different soldiers in their Class Bs, at which point Terry stops lunch, goes over, breaks up the fight, tells his sergeant, like, hey, sergeant, knock this shit off, yada, 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 goes back to eating lunch. A couple minutes later, fight breaks out again, same exact sergeant. Terry gets up, now he's pissed. Like, Terry's a cool guy, doesn't want to chew you out, but if he gives you a direct order, you better fucking listen.
Right.
So Terry grabs his sergeant and he's like, Sergeant, I thought I told you to not fight. And the sergeant looks at Terry and goes, General, you didn't hear what they said about the 1st Infantry Division. They said we couldn't fight our way out of a wet paper bag. At which point Terry looks this NCO in the eyes and goes, all right, get back in there.
Right,
And then proceeded to
right,
go back and
'cause
eat his
what?
lunch while he watched this NCO beat up a couple of paper pushers. So
Not
it's
wrong
definitely a
with
shit show going on here, but by the time all this information reaches Eisenhower, all he sees is the word riot written on a piece of paper. He calls Omar Bradley into his office, chews Omar Bradley's ass. Omar Bradley basically blames all of it on Terry Allen, saying that he's a poor disciplinarian and that he's not doing a good job manning his men. So Omar Bradley basically hatches a plan that he's going to try to get Terry Allen relieved of command. The problem is they're about to go invade Sicily, and despite the fact that Terry Allen and Patton don't really like each other, Patton finds out that they're going to not let the 1st Infantry Division partake in the amphibious landings at Gela, at which point Patton says, no, I need those 1st Infantry sons of bitches, I won't go without them. So General Patton essentially ends up keeping Terry in the fight, not because he likes him, but because he recognizes that he needs him, because Terry Allen is that fucking good. So July 10th, 1943, Operation Husky kicks off, the amphibious landing in Sicily, and the 1st Infantry Division is landing at Gela, and they need to take it over. It is heavily fortified, and it is a tough fight the entire time, but Terry gets his men, and they establish this beachhead, and they start moving forward. On the second day of fighting, Terry's back at his headquarters, and Teddy is out on the front line, and where Teddy's at gets overrun by Hermann Göring's tanks. They attack with 60 German tanks. At this point, Terry doesn't have any tanks to send to go fight him, and he doesn't have enough anti-tank in his infantry to be able to do anything. So Terry, thinking fast, orders Teddy to have the men bed down, let the tanks roll right over the top of their fortified positions, and then once the tanks are past them, fight off all the infantry that's going to be coming in behind them, and that's exactly what they do. But now Terry still has to figure out what to do with the 60 German tanks making a beeline straight towards him. So Terry sends the order out to his forward observers to get ready to call in for naval gunfire, and then he orders his artillery to lower the guns and, I quote, slug it out when the tanks come. And that's exactly what they do. Teddy and his infantry on the front line fend off all the German infantry, and Terry's artillery and naval gunfire takes out all the German tanks. By the end of that day's battle, Terry has lost a ton of men. His line is fractured. He's still got guys all over the place trying to hold on desperately to key terrain features. He's hurting bad, and he still can't get tanks up there. At this point, Terry realizes he needs to pull a Sun Tzu. He needs to appear strong when he's at his weakest, and he issues a single order in all caps: the division attacks at midnight. And that's exactly what happens. At midnight, they open up with naval gunfire and artillery. The 1st ID launches their night attack, catching the Germans completely off guard. And once the smoke settles, they realize that the Germans were gearing up to launch a major offensive the very next day. But the 1st ID and Terry Allen beat them to it, wiping them out and capturing all the objectives by sunrise. Terry Allen and the 1st ID have saved the day. However, we can't say that because we don't like Terry Allen because he takes care of his troops. So rather than crediting Terry Allen, Omar Bradley shifts the credit and gives it to Patton because it's technically Terry Allen's boss, saying, and I quote, General Patton's insistence on having the division for the assault may have saved the 2nd Corps from disaster.
This is a load of barnacles.
After that, the first ID is ordered to go take over an airfield. They do that almost immediately, and from there, there's another super hard fight that they're going to need the first ID for at a town called Trenoa, which is part of the Etna defense line, and it absolutely has to be captured. The problem is it's a mountainous town in Sicily that's described as being so hilly that it would tax a mountain goat, and there's a bunch of Germans in there that are heavily fortified and ready to fight. So Terry and the first ID show up, and this is a hard fight. But Terry's in command. He's shifting soldiers around, forcing the Germans to shift their soldiers around, causing the Germans to expose a weak point, at which point Terry would attack. He just out-finesses the German command at every possible turn, and the first ID takes over the town in 6 days, and then holds it while the Germans desperately launched 24 counteroffensive towards him, and he stuffed every single one of them. Now, in the midst of the battle, as it became apparent that Terry Allen might actually pull this shit off, two other generals, General Wyman and General Huber, showed up as observers. They then proceed to sit back, watch Terry Allen and the first ID out-finesse the Germans at every conceivable turn, take over the entire town in 6 days, breaking the Etna defensive line, and then, once the battle was over, they informed Terry Allen and Teddy Roosevelt Jr. that they are both being relieved of command under the orders of General Eisenhower and General Omar Bradley. And their reasoning for it was essentially what it was back in Oran when they planned the entire thing, saying that Terry Allen was a poor disciplinarian, and because of that, the 1st Infantry Division had become too unruly. So the entire 1st Infantry Division is absolutely furious. They absolutely love their fighting General Terry Allen. Terry Allen is absolutely furious because, well, his career is essentially over and he is being shipped back to the United States. Ironically, just 2 days after he is officially relieved of command of the 1st Infantry Division, he ends up on the cover of Time magazine praising him as the best fighting general in the United States Army. And now he's been relieved of command and is getting sent back to the United States. And you have to understand, in World War II, when you were relieved of command and sent back to the United States, like, that was it. You were done. You were going to be in charge of like a training facility or some bullshit. You were never going to see combat or major warfare ever again. This is the end of Terry Allen's career. So Terry makes it back to the United States, doesn't really have orders, he's on rest and recuperation, and after 7 weeks, he receives a letter from General Eisenhower that says, and I quote, "I'm certain that after you've had your well-deserved rest from the battlefield, your experience and courage will command your assignment to equally, if not more important duty."
I'm back, baby!
Apparently, while Omar Bradley and Patton don't like Allen, Eisenhower still does, and he's the top dog. Because of this, both Terry and Roosevelt are given a second shot at command. Teddy Roosevelt Jr. is famously sent back overseas where he partakes in the first wave landing of Utah Beach during D-Day, and Terry Allen is sent to Oregon where he assumes command of the 104th Infantry Division, aka the Timberwolves. Terry assumes command in October of 1943, and for almost a year, he trains this unit to get ready for combat. They train all over the country. They train in Oregon. They train in California. They train at Camp Hyder for desert combat. They are ready for absolutely anything, and the entire time, Terry Allen dedicates 35 hours a week to night combat. And the Timberwolves become the first ever U.S. Army unit to specialize in nighttime operations. September 1944, Terry Allen and the Timberwolves make their way into northern France, fighting alongside British and Canadian units, most likely an effort to keep Terry Allen away from all the other United States generals. Once Terry gets in France, his first order of business is to go to the graveside of one of his best friends, Teddy Roosevelt Jr., the only general to land in the first wave of D-Day, who would pass away just 6 days later from a heart attack and be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. And after that, Terry Allen is pissed and goes on an absolute tear through the enemy. Shortly after the British and the Canadians witness the Timberwolves in combat operations, Canadian General G.G. Simmons says, and I quote, "Once the Timberwolves got their teeth into the Germans, they showed great dash. The British and Canadian troops on their flanks expressed great admiration for their courage and enthusiasm. When they again meet the Germans, all hell cannot stop the Timberwolves." And he was absolutely correct, because Terry Allen and the Timberwolves fight through northern France. They fight through the Netherlands. They push the Germans back past the Meuse River. They help capture Antwerp. They capture the major industrial city of Stolberg. They run down the German army, liberating towns left and right. During the Battle of the Bulge, the last-ditch German Hail Mary of an offensive, they not only hold their positions, but they contain the Germans on the northern flank. Due to their ability to operate at night, the British and the Canadians simply start calling the Timberwolves the Night Fighters. They are so impressed by Terry Allen and the Timberwolves that Sir Alexander Harold of the British Army calls calls Terry Allen the best division commander he's seen in 2 world wars. Bear in mind, this is at a time where British and American officers had a rivalry and didn't think very highly of each other at all. From there, the Timberwolves come up on the historic German city of Halle. It's this beautiful town that's been there forever, and it is being occupied by German soldiers under the command of Felix von Luckner, the famed Sea Raider from World War I. Terry Allen personally brokers their surrender by basically coming to the negotiating table and telling Luckner, hey look, this is a really pretty historic city. If you don't surrender now, I'm gonna level the whole fucking thing. So he reluctantly agrees to surrender to Terry Allen. The Timberwolves then continue to push further inland until they actually run into the Soviet Red Army, at which point Terry Allen takes the patch off of his arm and declares the Soviet commander an honorary Timberwolf, and the Soviet officer does the same to Terry Allen. And according to legend, they spent that night having a drinking competition, and Terry Allen won. From there, the Timberwolves moved to help seal the Ruhr pocket, cutting off 300,000 German soldiers and ultimately forcing them to surrender before they moved on to liberate a concentration camp. Shortly after that, the Germans would surrender, the Timberwolves was deactivated in July of 1945, and Terry Allen would finally retire in 1946 after achieving his redemption of not only getting fired from his initial job, but taking a year to train another unit, fighting all the way across the European theater, and he still beat Patton into Germany by 4 months. After a lifetime of military service, Terry retired, moved to his wife's hometown in El Paso, Texas, where he became an insurance salesman and was very active in the veterans community, helping out any and every way that he possibly could. Unfortunately, at the age of 79, Terry would make one final sacrifice for his country. His 38-year-old son, Terry Allen Jr., was killed in combat in Vietnam, and Terry would pass away 2 years later at the age of 81. He is currently buried at Fort Bliss National Cemetery with his wife and his son. And that is the story of Terry De La Mesa Allen, aka Terrible Terry, the general that cared more about his subordinates than the opinions of his contemporaries. The man who legendary war correspondent Ermi Pyle described as the greatest leader of men and the greatest tactical general in the United States Army. And in my opinion, the most gangster general of World War II. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch.
Hit that like button, man.
Quack bang out. Shit pisses me off. Literally one of the greatest generals in American history, and nobody even knows his name. Hopefully this video helps with that at least. See you later.
Terry Allen.
Terry Allen, hit that like button. Somebody make a movie about that, man.
Terrible Terry.
Facts. Let's get it. More fat electrician on the way. Let's get it.